Greetings, students. Welcome to Complexity Fuel. My name is Mr. Little, and today I'm looking at this picture from a war bonds drive that existed during World War II in the United States. And it's essentially encouraging U.S. citizens to purchase war bonds, which helps the United States war effort. And this one is from 1942. In particular, this one is praising the industry of Detroit, calling it the arsenal of democracy. And this is a term that Franklin Delano Roosevelt used during World War II because of Detroit's powerful industrial base, a center of aircraft and tank production. And the USA is often perceived as the arsenal of democracy, the place where everything was built that won World War II. But is it really that simple? Well, I want to look at another place that also happened to be a very strong arsenal of democracy, or at the very least, an arsenal that helped to defeat fascism. So what do you actually have to know about government mobilization and the conduct of World War II? Well, officially, what you have to know is that governments used a variety of strategies, including political propaganda, art, media, intensified forms of nationalism to mobilize populations both at home and in the colonies for the purposes of waging war. Governments used ideologies, including fascism and communism, to mobilize all of their states' resources for war. However, this standard definition leaves out a very particular element of the Soviet Union that I'd like to look at. Specifically, I'd like to talk about Soviet Central Asia. Now, if you don't know where Soviet Central Asia is, think of it this way. It's the stands. It's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, which you can see here on this map in the white circle as part of the larger Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. We normally think about the Soviet Union as just Russia, and it was Russia, but it was also 14 other republics as of 1945. 5 of them happened to be in the region that we call Central Asia, and these were not small countries per se. They might have had up to 15% of the USSR's total population at the beginning of World War II. What separated Central Asia from most of the rest of the Soviet Union was that it was majority Muslim, and it was majority Turkic or Farsi speaking. Most other parts of the Soviet Union were East Slavic and spoken East Slavic language, such as Russian. Now, prior to the Soviet Union's decision to draw the borders that you see here in 1924, much of this area was ruled over by 1 or 2 Islamic emirates or khanates. And within each borders, the Soviet Union declared that there was a titular nationality, that is the majority nationality as defined by the Russians. So remember how we talked about borders being drawn by outside powers when we discussed imperialism? This is sort of a case of that. And I don't want to get into the complexities of it, but these are still the borders that exist today for Central Asia. During World War II, Central Asia plays a really important role in the Soviet Union's victory. How important? Well, in terms of just sheer manpower, which is a lot of what we think of when we think of the Soviet Union, as many as 8 million of the 34 million mobilized soldiers of the Soviet Union were non-Slavic minority soldiers, which meant they could have come from Central Asia, the Caucasus, or Siberia. So that's about 1 in 4, about 24%. And a good chunk of those would have come from Central Asia and formed a huge bulk of the manpower that eventually helped win Russian victory. In terms of loss of population, the Central Asian republics lost more than Russia itself during the war. So, for example, the Russian Republic, although it was the largest and suffered the most in terms of sheer numbers, as a percentage, it only lost about 5% of its overall population, whereas the Uzbek, Kyrgyz, and Tajik republics lost 8% each. The Turkmen Republic lost about 7.5%, and the Kazakh Soviet Republic lost about 10% of its population. In terms of manpower dedication, the Central Asian republics paid a very heavy price for their participation in World War II. Now, you might be wondering why these soldiers chose to fight, and it's probably not that they were all necessarily diehard communists, but the common experience of combat bound them together, extrinsic desires to not let each other down. One notable contribution was that of Ra Karkimjov Kashkarabayev, and I sincerely hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But the fun fact is that this Kazakh soldier was actually the first one to raise the Soviet flag over the Reichstag. He actually did it the day before this very famous photo that we're all used to seeing in our textbooks. However, his raising of the flag was done at 10:30 at night. Therefore, it was too dark to be seen. And when they reshot the photograph the next day, the Soviet central government insisted that the soldiers who raised the flag had to be from the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic and a Georgian from the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic. And while I don't know for sure, I suspect this is because Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union himself, was Georgian. It would take about 50 years after World War II for Kashkarabayev to be given the recognition of actually having been the first to raise the Soviet flag in Berlin. And when we talk about the arsenal of democracy, Central Asia in some ways was the Soviet Union's arsenal of democracy. So because much of Western Russia, the industrial heartland of the Soviet Union, was under siege or under occupation by the Germans, many factories were wholesale relocated to Central Asia. According to one source, by Christmas of 1941, 1,300 factories from West Russia in and around Leningrad, Moscow, and the Ukraine had been dismantled, and over half of them had been relocated to Central Asia. And there's even a great story about a steel factory in Tashkent that began producing steel before the factory itself had even been reconstructed. The initial parts had arrived, and even in the snow and the rain, they began to produce steel for the war effort. It speaks to the desperation of the war effort, but it also speaks to the determination of those in Central Asia to help the Soviets win victory over the Nazis. And the Soviet Union, of course, was not afraid to pump propaganda out their way to help promote this war production. So this poster you see right here, although it actually comes from before World War II, essentially encourages workers to not potentially let the Nazi or capitalist powers come in and destroy all of the progress that has been made in Central Asia. These individuals who were designed to look like peasants from Central Asia with their caps and their robes, wielding weapons in an attempt to defeat a monopoly man-looking capitalist with a swastika on its head. In addition, note that it's both in the Cyrillic alphabet, but also in the Arabic script. And of course, as part of the mobilization process, the Soviet government was going to have to make nice with the fact that the majority of the people in Central Asia were Muslim. Now, from 1921, when Central Asia was incorporated into the Soviet Union, until 1943, there was a certain degree of religious persecution going on. But the Soviet Union was officially an atheist government, and it did not tolerate religious practice publicly. That's not to say that many people did not secretly continue to have their own practices. But by 1941, over 96% of all the mosques in Central Asia had closed, from 26,000 down to 1,000. The Soviet government had officially closed most madrasas, which were centers of learning, and instead replaced them with public education systems, and definitely shifted the center of education away from the traditional Islamic schools. And they also engaged in what's called hujum, or an anti-veiling campaign, where they publicly encouraged women to remove their veils or remove their headscarves. That's not to say this didn't have any backlash, but this was official Soviet policy until 1943. And then, with the outbreak of the war and the desperate need to have the support of their Muslim population, the Soviet Union was willing to make concessions to the ulama, the religious scholars, who pushed for some concessions in allowing Islamic practice in public. As a result, the Soviet Union set up the spiritual administration of the Muslims of Central Asia and Kazakhstan, known as Sadum. Now, Sadum would regulate the activity of Islam in the USSR until the dissolution of the USSR. And they would do things like allow for a limited number of people to go on the Hajj every year to Mecca, cease the arresting of religious leaders, and the USSR would no longer officially condemn religion and allow it to exist, although in a highly regulated form. So when we talk about governments mobilizing their people, one of the ways the USSR did this was to make peace with the Muslim religious elite of its Central Asian republics in exchange for their support of the war. And so where could you use all this information? Well, if you have any essay that discusses government conduct of World War I or II, the use of propaganda to support the war effort, the use of ideologies to legitimize government power, or just any essay on the Soviet Union in general, including the story of Soviet Central Asia and its role in World War II, is a great way to make your essay a little more complex.